Welcome to Crown TV. Immerse yourself with a captivating audio from our stories. We provide an alternative way to read books in audio. We upload many audiobooks as possible, from bestsellers to timeless classic. Subscribe and stay tuned for new upload.
Episode 306, Close Call. Nathan clenched his fists in frustration. Even though Alex was still cut off from the family, there were things he could do to ruin Nathan's plans. If he told Justin and Nellie what Nathan was up to, they could go to their grandfather and let him know. If that happened, Nathan would be in big trouble. Reginald knew what was happening. He understood that Nathan was behind the whole affair. The audacity shocked him. He'd thrown his whole family under the bus, he thought, if it will help him enrich one of his lackeys. The others in the conference room were confused. They didn't know who Alex was talking to. Colin was getting anxious. "I don't know what you're talking about," he protested to Alex. "I'm the one making the decisions here. I'm buying this company because I want to, and that's it." He turned to Reginald. "Reginald, just sign the contract. It's the only way. You know that. Don't listen to this nonsense." "Colin." Nathan's voice rang in Colin's ear. He sounded weak and defeated. "The deal is off." "But, Nathan," Colin stammered. He was so panicked that he had forgotten to hide Nathan's involvement. "Reginald is ready to sign. After he does, the Fidelity Group is mine. We'll control everything." Colin's mind was racing. Just one signature, he thought. Afterwards, we'll topple the Drakes. We could be the masters of DC. And now Nathan just wants to drop it? What's he doing? Nathan grew angry at Colin's disobedience. "I said the deal is off. Are you listening or not?" Colin took a deep breath. There was nothing he could do. If Nathan said the deal was off, then it wasn't going to happen. "All right," he said unwillingly. Everyone in the room was staring at Colin. It was becoming clearer and clearer what was happening. "Reginald," Colin said, "I withdraw the offer." David and his friends jumped with joy. Those employees who had not taken Colin's bribes were equally happy. They did not fully know what had happened, but they felt like they had won a great victory. It was all thanks to Alex. Joseph, Noah, and those executives who had betrayed the Drakes looked utterly defeated. Many of them hoped desperately that they might be able to keep their jobs. "Colin, what are you doing?" Noah asked. "Everything is going our way and you're backing out?" Colin looked at him with a pitiful expression on his face. "I don't want to, but the guy who backs me won't let me go through with it. There's nothing I can do." His words caused an uproar. Many in the room had risked their jobs by listening to Noah and backing Colin. They had gathered around him and demanded an explanation. "Listen, I'm really sorry," Colin told them. "You'll all receive $15,000. And if any of you need jobs, there's a place for you in my family's company." The executives became even angrier. $15,000? One of them asked indignantly. "Are you joking? That's not even a month's salary. And come work for you? I know what you pay your managers. Compared to what we make now, it's peanuts." Colin grew irritated at their whining and bickering. You should consider your choices. Even if I don't buy the Fidelity Group, it's still going bankrupt. You'll lose your jobs anyway, and who's going to hire you when your last job was at such a failure of a business? I can promise you that I won't. He paused. When the Fidelity Group collapses, my family will still be a major employer. And without the Drakes, you'll need me on your good side. As he spoke, Colin felt better and better about the future. The Fidelity Group would collapse. Nathan might still give him some money to improve the prospects of his family. In time, the Pattersons could still become the most influential family in Washington, D.C. Very clever, Colin, Nathan whispered in Colin's ear. He realized that the Drakes would not forget what he had done. He still needed an ally in Washington, D.C. You're not going to fix what you did to the Drakes, are you? Alex asked forcefully. He was speaking to Nathan through Colin. Even if the deal didn't happen, only Nathan could save the Fidelity Group from going under. Nathan looked at Alex's gloomy appearance on the screen. He thought for a few seconds, and then he knew what to say. He had covered his tracks. The intermediaries he had used to destroy the Fidelity Group were loyal to him. They would swear that they had acted on their own. Colin, he said, tell Alex that I have nothing to do with the Fidelity Group's troubles. He can check with the companies that ruined their businesses. They'll tell him that they did it on their own. I can't do anything to save the company. Colin repeated Nathan's message to Alex. Alex stared at Colin in disbelief. He trembled at what would happen to the family if Nathan were ever in charge. Would a true Ambrose really hurt the family like this for his own profit? He asked. You don't know what you're talking about, Colin said, obviously directed by Nathan. You're not part of the family. Don't talk as if you were. Then, Colin turned to Reginald. Reginald, we'll let you keep your company, but you won't last a week. Your wealth will erode, and you'll end up in the gutter. And it's all thanks to Alex. With that, Colin turned to leave. Reginald wanted to stop him and beg him to buy the Fidelity Group after all. The company could not be saved. If it was allowed to go under before they could sell it, the loss would be enormous. Who says the Fidelity Group is going bankrupt? Alex said. Mr. Drake, please rest assured. I think you can expect to return to normal within 1 hour. Colin turned to him and laughed. Dream on. The company is done for. It couldn't return to normal operations in 100 years. Alex ignored him and addressed Reginald. Mr. Drake, Lindsay told me you were trying to raise funds to use to weather this crisis. How much would you need to reverse the situation entirely? Reginald looked gratefully at Lindsay. He had not figured out how Alex had known to come here today. Now he knew. Lindsay had told him. Now that some of the mystery has been taken out of all this, I think we might get by with less. We need about $1 billion. That would be the bare minimum to keep us afloat, he said. Reginald paused, and his voice grew sad when he resumed speaking. But I can only muster up about $500 million on such short notice. The room fell silent as they considered the numbers. Even though all of David's friends were more than willing to help, they had each managed to pledge a couple of million. They knew that they would not be able to help the Drakes reach $1 billion. Aren't you going to be a good boy and help them, Alex? Colin said derisively. You'd only need about $500 million. I guess you won't be able to get to be the hero after all. Alex smiled. The amount of money was very large, but he thought he might be able to make it work. He took out his phone and dialed Jessup's number. "Hello, Mr. Clifton," he said when the call was answered. The whole room stared at him. "Could you help me with a little problem?" Episode 307, Back from the Brink. Jessup was in his villa when the phone rang. He had spent the day getting reports from his people about how the work against the Stedman family was going. The Cliftons were well on their way to reestablishing control over Baltimore, and it was in large part thanks to Alex. When he heard Alex's voice on the other end of the phone, he was as surprised as he was delighted. "Of course, Alex," he said. He would do anything to pay Alex back for saving his family. "What can I do for you?" "I need to borrow about $500 million, Alex told him frankly. "I promise there's a good reason. Would that be possible?" Jessup was shocked. It seemed impossible to him that Alex would need that kind of money. But he was determined to help him however he could. "What's it for?" he asked. "Well, Mr. Clifton," Alex explained, "Reginald Drake, chairman of the Washington, D.C. Fidelity Group, is a friend of mine. The company's been sabotaged, and it needs about $500 million to recover. Once the situation improves, I promise to pay you back in full." That was all Jessup needed to hear. "Say no more, Alex," he said. "No matter what the money's for, I'll get it for you. I owe you that." He paused and thought for a moment before he continued. "I don't have that much money in cash. I can get you $250 million right now, and I can liquidate some assets in order to get you the other half of the sum you need. It shouldn't take more than 10 days. How does that sound?" Alex was overcome with gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Clifton," he said. "I'll accept the $250 million. I'll find another way to get the rest." He was deeply touched by Jessup's generosity, but he couldn't let him sell off that much of his property. Jessup tried to protest, but Alex assured him that what he had done was enough. Jessup reluctantly accepted Alex's word, and then he asked him to give the phone to Reginald. Once he had gotten the bank account number and the money had been transferred, he said goodbye to Alex and hung up the phone. Alex had one more call to make. When his call with Jessup ended, he went onto the internet and looked up the phone number of the Embassy of Brunei. He felt nervous about doing it this way, but apart from the Cliftons, the only other person he could ask was Justin, and Justin could get in trouble if he lent him the money. Nathan would certainly use it against him. The Sultan of Brunei was the only option he had left. It was a long shot, but the Sultan had told Alex that he should call and ask for help if he was ever in trouble. Besides, $250 million was probably nothing to the royal family of Brunei. When the embassy answered, Alex told them his name and that he was a recipient of the National Medal of Honor. The embassy staff quickly verified this information and connected the call to the royal palace in Brunei. The Sultan himself answered the phone. "Alex, my friend," he said in Malay. An interpreter also connected the call, and she translated everything he said into English. "You finally remembered to call me. I'm very happy to speak to you." Based on his tone, it seemed that he had managed to overcome his grief for his wife. "Hello, Your Highness," Alex answered. "It's a great honor to speak to you. I have a great favor to ask of you. I need to borrow money for a friend. I hope you can help us." "Of course," the Sultan said. "I'll lend you whatever you need. Do you remember that you asked me to invest some money in New York? Well, I did. It's been very profitable, and a lot of our people have gone over there to be educated. It will help our country enormously. Thank you." "Your Highness is very kind," Alex said modestly. He was very pleased to learn that his advice might help improve things in Brunei. Once again, he gave the phone to Reginald, who gave the necessary information to the Sultan. Once the money was transferred, Alex thanked the Sultan for his help and hung up the phone. Reginald was stupefied. Alex had gotten him the $500 million he needed, and it had taken less than 20 minutes. He didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. David and his friends stared at Alex in awe. Their shock turned to ecstatic joy when they finally understood what had happened. The Fidelity Group was saved. Colin's and Noah's heads were spinning. Less than an hour ago, they were on the verge of taking over the Drake fortune. Now, they had lost their hold of the company, and Alex had somehow managed to save it from bankruptcy. It seemed impossible. Alex pushed Colin aside and went to the door of the conference room. He opened it and was met by a large crowd of reporters. They looked at him with anxious confusion. It was clear that they were all itching for a story. Alex smiled at them. "There's big news inside," he said. "You should go and get some interviews." He stepped aside, and the throng of reporters rushed into the conference room. Reginald, Colin, and David and his friends stood dumbstruck. When Alex saw them standing there without moving, he called out to Reginald. "Mr. Drake, didn't you say that you could relieve the crisis immediately if you had the money?" Reginald looked at him and sprang into action. He took out his phone and called the largest partner of the Fidelity Group. "Hello, Mr. Wood. I think we should discuss our business arrangement again." "There's no point, Reginald," Mr. Wood answered. "I've already told you that I've had another offer with much better conditions, and they're promising to reimburse us for the breach of contract. I simply can't continue to do business with you." "Name a price, and I'll pay it," Reginald retorted. "I value our partnership, and I won't give it up. It's time we increase the value in this agreement, don't you think?" "Listen," Mr. Wood began. Then he stopped himself. "Did you say increase?" "Well, if you're serious, of course I'll stay with you. After all, we already have a contract. We'll talk later about amending it." Reginald hung up the phone and looked triumphantly at his executives. "Call every one of our suppliers and business partners," he said. "Don't try to negotiate. Just tell them that we'll increase their rates to continue our partnership. Now get going." The executives immediately took out their phones and started making calls. David immediately set his friends to work. They needed to make up for the positions left vacant by Colin's bribery. In a few minutes, the room was abuzz with frenetic phone conversations. Before long, it became clear that the Fidelity Group would manage to retain all their former partners. Every single one of them accepted the new terms. Nathan's machinations were no match for the deals that Reginald could now afford to make, and there was less of a cost in maintaining already existing relationships. For every call that was made, the resulting agreement was reported to Reginald. As he tallied up the results, he grew more and more relieved. When all the calls had been made, He sighed relief and looked at the results on his notepad. "We've managed to regain 80% of our business contracts," he said. "The remaining 20% consists of the businesses we've lost as a result of government intervention. Our next step is to reach out to governmental departments and explain our situation. I have no doubt that all prohibitive restrictions will be removed." The happiness in the room was palpable. The Fidelity Group had been saved, and the future of Reginald's family was secured. Some of the people in the room cried with relief, and many closed their eyes, gave thanks to God. Lindsay was particularly happy, not only for what had happened, but for Alex's part in it. She thought of him as the hero of the hour, and she needed everyone else to think so as well. She took a step forward and smiled. "Alex is the one who made this possible. He's the one who came up with the money." Alex had been temporarily forgotten in the frenzy of the phone calls, but Lindsay's words reminded everyone of him. The room went silent as they looked around at each other, and then their eyes fixed on Alex. Reginald reached out to shake his hand, and those closest to him slapped him on the shoulder. Further back, someone let out a cry of adulation. "Let's hear it for Alex!" More and more people joined in, and before long, the walls seemed to shake from the calling of Alex's name. Episode 308, Payback. Alex felt uncomfortable. He wasn't the kind of person who enjoyed being the center of attention, and he wasn't used to it. He didn't know what he was supposed to do. He tried telling everyone to stop cheering, but the more he tried, the more excited they got. Because David was particularly impressed and grateful, he cheered for Alex louder than anyone else. This only increased the intensity with which everybody else did, and there seemed to be no end in sight. Lindsay could tell that Alex was embarrassed, and she felt a little bad for him. At the same time, his bashful reaction only increased her feelings for him and her sense that he deserved the praise. She joined in the cheering with a sweet smile on her face. Alex saw her smiling at him, and he smiled back. He could tell that she knew how uncomfortable he was, and then he remembered that it was all her fault. With a mischievous smile on his face, he reached out and pulled her toward him. "There's someone else who deserves credit," he exclaimed over the cheers of the crowd. "If Lindsay hadn't told me what was happening here today, I wouldn't be here. You should thank her instead." Everyone laughed, and cheers for Lindsay started mingling with those for Alex. Her face turned a deep red, and she looked bashfully at Alex. "Why would you embarrass me like this?" she asked him in a playfully accusing tone. Alex laughed. "David's company's been saved. We should celebrate together. It's not every day you have a group of people standing around cheering your name." Lindsay smiled at him, and her embarrassment disappeared. In her mind, everything was just as it should be. The mingling of their names and the cheers of the crowd seemed to increase their connection. And at that moment, she felt that they belonged together. It was as if they were together. The voices around them gradually subsided, and the silence brought her back to reality. She became aware that he was still holding her hand, and that every eye in the room was on them. She suddenly felt very awkward. "That's enough," she cried and pulled her hand from his. With her head lowered, she went back to her father on the other side of the room. Alex was taken aback. At first, he thought he must have crossed a line, but then he looked into her eyes again, there was no anger in them. Instead, he saw a secret joy, the happiness she wanted to conceal. He was assured that her action was not because of him, and he dropped it from his mind. The cheering had died down, and the executives who had gone along with Colin and Noah were starting to congeal around Reginald. They begged for his forgiveness, and many were desperate to have their jobs back. If they wanted to maintain the lives they were accustomed to, they had no other choice. David lashed out at them. "Get back!" he shouted as he waved them away from his father. Jason joined him. "You're all useless cowards," he said. "When it looked like the company was in danger, you all jumped ship as fast as possible. And now that it's been saved, you come crawling back? Why would they take you back?" David's other friends looked at the executives with scorn in their eyes. But the executives didn't care what they thought. The only one who mattered to them was Reginald. They knew that he was level-headed and fair. He would give them a second chance. "You can continue to work for us," Reginald said after a few seconds of thought. David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Dad, how can you let them stay?" he protested. "They'll just be a massive liability." The executives ignored him and came forward to shake hands with Reginald. They looked as if they were about to kiss his feet. Reginald stopped them with a hand raise. "However," he continued, "while I will allow you to come back to work for us, you can no longer work in any kind of managerial role. It'll be low-level positions only, and any promotion within the company is out of the question. Forever." David laughed, not only at the executives, but at himself as well. "It was so stupid of me to doubt him," he thought. "He knows what he's doing. He'll never let himself be betrayed again." The executives were shocked. "You can't mean that, Mr. Drake," one of them said. "Please, cut my salary. Make it as low as you like. But I can't make it on a ground-level salary. I'll starve." "Yes," another joined in. "Mr. Drake, I just bought a house. The mortgage is very expensive. Also, my mother's in the hospital, and my father can't take care of himself. He needs to be in a care center. Without my salary, I don't know how they'll survive." They each told one sob story after another, but Reginald saw right through them. The more they spoke, the more they steeled his heart against them. It wasn't long before they knew that it was useless. They could see it in his eyes. Realizing this, one of them said, "This whole mess is Noah's and Colin's fault. We should settle it with them." They all turned from Reginald and swarmed Noah and Colin, who trembled in fear for their lives. The executives looked as if they were ready to tear them apart. "What are you doing?" Colin shouted in desperation. "I'm worth billions of dollars. I'll rule DC one day. Get away from me." His voice trembled with fear as he made his threats. "Billions of dollars?" one of the executives repeated mockingly. "Yeah, sure. And you'll rule Washington? You're a liar." The executives were furious, and they needed some way to vent their frustration. They rushed at Colin and Noah, grabbed and hit out at them maniacally for several minutes, and then dispersed. They formed a circle, and Noah and Colin lay beaten on the floor in the middle. Colin's face was swollen on the left side and bright red on the right. His hair stood on end, and his clothes were torn. Noah had been beaten far worse. He had been kicked to the ground and stomped on by several feet. His suit was in tatters, and his face was black and blue. He looked as if a brick wall had fallen on top of him. David was indignant. As much as he hated Colin and Noah, the treacherous executives were no better in his eyes. "We're not here to act like hooligans," he said to them. "Get out! Security, throw these people out of here." Several security guards came into the room. They went over to restrain the executives, but some of them resisted. The guards struck at their legs, and they fell to the ground or kneeled. Noah raised himself onto his knees. He was shaking with pain. "Reginald, these spineless cowards might beg for your mercy," he said, "but I won't. I know you better than anyone. I know you're as rotten as any of them. And yet you stand there judging us. It makes me sick." Noah knew he had made a mistake by giving up his job in the Fidelity Group, but he would not bow to Reginald. The way he saw it, he didn't have anything more to lose. Reginald stared blankly at him. "Noah, I know you've felt slighted lately," he said. "You're wrong, but it doesn't matter now. You betrayed me because you think I sidelined you. But now you're out, and I'm doing better than ever. How does that make you feel?" Noah sneered. "You've always been a liar, Reginald," he said. "We started this company together. Sure, you handled the daily operations, but I was responsible for purchases and security. Do you remember the state of the neighborhood we were in? If it wasn't for me, we wouldn't have survived. And then your precious Fidelity Group wouldn't exist." He paused, and the look in his eyes changed from contempt to a resigned sadness. He had carried these words inside him for many years. "Then you decided that the company was only yours," he continued with disdain in his voice. "But you deigned to let me stay on as a manager. How merciful." It was true that Reginald and Noah had started the Fidelity Group together. In the early days, it was a very different company, much smaller, and they had set it up using $15,000 of their own money. Since they started with so little money, they had rented a location in a rough neighborhood. The area was riddled with crime, and ruffians often came to the local shops to demand protection money. Other shops nearby were blackmailed or destroyed, but theirs was not. Noah had a history as a hoodlum, and he had served several years in prison. No one in the area dared to provoke him. Noah saved them from the problem of local crime, but they had faced other issues as well. Corruption was rampant, and politicians and government institutions needed to be appeased. If those people weren't satisfied, the company would be fined. Reginald had dealt with these kinds of issues. He was the one with the college degree. They operated like that for many years, and their little company gradually developed into a huge conglomerate. But the bigger they got, the less of a problem the local hooligans became. While Reginald was still instrumental in dealing with legal issues, Noah's usefulness decreased. He was marginalized. Reginald remembered all this very well. "That's your version of the story, Noah," he said. "But it is incomplete. Allow me to fill you in. A year after we started, the government stirred up trouble and tried to shut us down. But I made it go away. Do you remember?" Noah stared at him. He remembered. "What are you trying to say?" he asked. Reginald smiled. He had been wanting to tell this story for a long time. "I'm saying that it was a difficult time, not unlike today. We could have been closed down. For some reason, the local government kept demanding money from us and issued strange fines. One time, they even hinted that it wouldn't stop unless I got rid of you. Noah grew nervous. He still didn't understand what Reginald was getting at. But without you, there wouldn't have been a fidelity group, Reginald continued. I had to take care of it. So I went to City Hall one day, and after that, our problems went away. He fixed his eyes intently on Noah. It wasn't until that day that I truly understood what was going on. You see, the government wasn't harassing us for no reason. There was a very good one. Can you guess what it was? Episode 309, Resolution. How should I know? Noah snapped. A few years ago, he would have made short work of the pampered rich men who were gathered around him, but he was getting older. On top of that, Reginald was throwing riddles at him about things that had happened 30 years ago. Reginald watched him with pity in his eyes. It has to do with why you went to prison, he continued. Ordinary women were never good enough for you, were they? You wanted better. So you went to Washington, checked into an expensive hotel, and found what you wanted. A real beauty. You followed her around town, and then you brought her back to your hotel room. A few days later, you were jailed. Reginald looked around the room. At that moment, it dawned on Noah that he wasn't just talking to him. Reginald was telling the story to the entire room. He sought to make Noah look bad. He needed to defend himself. So what? He asked indignantly. She was the daughter of some rich businessman who took offense. I didn't do anything wrong. Reginald shook his head. So you still think her father was a businessman? She wasn't. She was the daughter of the mayor of D.C., a man who couldn't risk his reputation nor his honor. So he had you put in prison, and then he kept tabs on you. When you got out, he was watching your every step. And when he learned about our business venture, he used the resources of the city to try to ruin you. Noah was shocked. He had never suspected any of this, but somehow he knew that it was true. That day when I went to City Hall, Reginald continued, I met the mayor and found out what was going on. I told him that our company had great potential. He was a reasonable man, and he realized that it was wrong to kill a promising enterprise for your sake. He agreed to stop harassing you. But there were conditions. He made me promise that you would never be in charge of the business. I don't know if it was to stop you from succeeding, or if he thought that you would doom the company. Either way, he said that he would start coming after us again if you were ever put in charge. That's why I could never let you be the chairman of the board. Noah was confused. All these years, he had misunderstood Reginald's intentions. Why didn't he tell me? He asked himself. But then he realized that his friend had wanted to spare him the burden of knowing the threat he was under. He must have figured that the strength of their friendship would bear the strain of what he had to do. Noah was close to tears as he looked at Reginald, who stood over him with pity in his eyes. His friend had protected him all these years, and he had betrayed him. He had almost doomed the Fidelity Group twice over. He became so angry that he punched himself twice in the face. Then he crawled over to Reginald and stood on his knees in front of him. Reginald, he said loudly as he sobbed. I'm so sorry. I almost destroyed our company. I'll never forgive myself. How can you even look at me? Reginald stepped forward and helped him to his feet. "Get up and stop talking nonsense," he said. "I'm equally to blame. I should have told you the truth. There will always be a place for you at the Fidelity Group." Reginald could be ruthless, but he was fiercely loyal to his real friends. "No, my friend," No answered. "If you really want to make this right, you have to kick me out. We both know I could never run the company." He smiled faintly. "I may have some skills, but running a business isn't one of them." Reginald nodded. He said that he would accept Noah's resignation, and that he would give him a large severance package. As a founder of the company, it was unthinkable that he should be left wanting. Noah was overcome with gratitude, and the two old friends embraced. The heartfelt moment didn't last long. Colin had been lying on the floor while Reginald told his story, but now he stood up slowly. He was hoping that nobody would notice him. But as he rose, a voice called out across the room. "Colin! What are you still doing here? Haven't you had enough?" Every eye in the room fell on him. "All right," he said, "I'm leaving. But I'll be back, and someday I'll rule this town." He turned to leave. "Colin, wait for me!" Daryl cried out and hurried after him. It gave him no pleasure, but he had already picked it aside. Colin was not going to give up, and the best thing Daryl could do was to stay the course. Miriam followed Daryl. Before she left, she glanced over at Alex, but there wasn't a trace of malice left in her eyes. At that moment, all she felt was awe at what she had seen him do. Alex was surprised and saddened when he saw her. Daryl's hold over her was stronger than he had thought. Reginald went up to Alex. "Alex, thank you again. I really couldn't imagine what would have happened here without you." "You're welcome, Mr. Drake," Alex responded. "I'm happy to help. But what will you do now? I'm afraid this crisis won't be the last. I hope you're prepared." Reginald smiled. "You're right," he said. "But there's a silver lining to this whole thing. The traitors have been weeded out, and we know who's loyal to the company now. All we need to do is fill the vacancies with the right people. We'll also reconsider our range of partnerships, so that we're not so dependent on the larger ones." Reginald knew how to grow from adversity. He had learned his lesson. Everyone in the room looked at him with admiration. "That's good to hear," Alex said with a smile. "You clearly don't need any help knowing what to do. I admire you very much, Mr. Drake." Reginald smiled and put his hand on Alex's shoulder. "I'll get the Fidelity Group back on track as quickly as I can. With any luck, I'll pay you back in about 5 years. "I'll take your word for it, Mr. Drake," Alex said. It wasn't important to him when the money was repaid. It wouldn't matter to the Cliftons, and the Sultan of Brunei wouldn't miss it either. As long as the Drakes put it back, the time frame didn't matter. The important thing was that the crisis was over. Alex went out for lunch with David and his friends. They were all very curious about who he was, but Alex didn't talk about himself. He kept the conversation focused on other things, and they all respected him too much to ask. After lunch, Reginald and David drove Alex to the airport. Before he left them outside the airport, he asked them to control the media coverage as much as possible, and not to allow his name or his picture to be published. Too much publicity could bring unwanted attention to his family. Reginald and David happily agreed, and they saw Alex off. He went into the airport, went through security, and got onto the next plane back to Baltimore. When he found his seat, he sat down and closed his eyes. He had no internet access on the plane, but he didn't miss it. He only wanted to sleep. Just as he was closing his eyes, a beautiful woman came walking down the middle aisle. She was wearing a black and blue jacket that revealed her slim figure. Her hair was dyed blonde and tied in a ponytail, and her earrings shimmered as she walked. She looks like a singer on TV, Alex thought. As he drifted off to sleep, he wondered if he hadn't seen her somewhere before. He woke up just as the plane landed in Baltimore. As it rolled into the terminal, he rubbed his eyes and stood up to disembark. He looked around for the beautiful woman, but he couldn't see her. When he came out of the airport and walked onto the street, he hailed a taxi and asked to be taken straight back to the university. Behind him, back inside the airport terminal, 2 men stood watching him. It was Chris and one of his men. Ever since his defeat at the hands of the Cliftons, Art had been in a terrible mood. He had not gone to work since then, but had locked himself up in his villa outside of town. Chris had never seen his father behave like that, and it worried him. The more he watched his father, the more convinced he became that their family was truly ruined. And it was all Alex's fault. But Chris also had questions. He needed to know how Alex was connected to the Cliftons, and why such an excellent martial artist would be working as a university security guard. Chris couldn't make any sense of it, and it was driving him mad. That was why he had been following Alex. At first, everything he did seemed perfectly normal. But then he had gone to Washington, D.C., and Chris's associates there had told him that he had gone to the Fidelity Group and somehow found them $500 million. That was when Chris had started to suspect that Alex might be the rumored son that had been cut off from the Ambrose family. The family kept a low profile, but the information had slipped out, and it fit. But Chris needed proof. Alex was connected and dangerous, and it might be dangerous to move against him. But if he was the disgraced son of the Ambrose family, then his family would not be protecting him. Chris could kill and move against him without fear of reprisal. "Chris, are we still following him?" his henchman reminded him. Alex's taxi was already driving off. Chris snapped back from his thoughts. "Yes, you go after him and report to me tonight." The other man nodded, left the terminal, and got a taxi to go after Alex. I need to make a move soon, Chris thought. I can't follow him around forever. I'm running out of money. Just as he turned around to go back to his car, a beautiful woman in a black and blue jacket came walking past him. It was the woman from the plane. As she walked past him, she muttered something to herself. He couldn't hear what she was saying, but it was something about money. And there was one word that had stood out among the rest. Alex. Episode 310, Financial Insecurity. Chris immediately sprang to attention. The mention of Alex's name had hit him like a thunderbolt. He looked over his shoulder. The girl was walking away from him out of the airport. His mind was racing with questions. I wonder how she knows him, he thought. Maybe she's an old flame. Anyway, she might be useful. He had to think fast. Based on what he had heard of her mutterings, he figured that she might have money troubles. It was even possible that she was after Alex for his money. If he was right, then he had a perfect opening. He took off his watch and rushed after her. It was a long shot, but it might work. When he caught up to her, he tapped her on the shoulder. She flung around with an annoyed expression on her face, but it softened when she saw him. This'll be easy, Chris thought with increased confidence. He had seen that look on enough young women to know what it meant. He held up the watch to her face and smiled. "Excuse me, miss," he said politely. "I think this fell out of your handbag." At the sight of the watch, her eyes brightened even more. Whoever she was, she recognized an expensive watch when she saw one. "Thank you," she said. "It's a gift from my boyfriend. I don't know what I would have done if I had lost it." She took the watch from him and quickly stuffed it into her handbag. "I'm always glad to return things to their rightful owners," Chris said. He looked at her with concealed scorn. He had sized her up as greedy, and it had paid off. It was usually a safe bet. And it's a good thing people are greedy, he thought. It makes them so much easier to exploit. "Not that I believe in fate," he told her, "but I have some time to kill, and now we've run into each other. Would you like to have dinner with me? My treat." "Of course," she answered. She seemed delighted at the offer. Chris got a taxi for them, and he took her to a luxurious restaurant in downtown Baltimore. He ordered the most expensive dishes on the menu for them, along with a bottle of the best French wine. It was all very expensive, and he made sure that she noticed. When they had ordered, he turned his full attention to her. "Tell me about yourself," he said and laughed. "I don't even know your name yet." "My name is Melissa," she answered. "I'm 22 years old, and I don't actually have a boyfriend. That watch is for my father." Her full name was Melissa Kennedy. The same Melissa Kennedy who had been part of the Dream Chasers girl group, who had nearly caused Debbie's death at the hands of Lou Rourke. After Alex had killed Lou at the Azalea guest house, he had chosen to spare her. But Melissa had not felt safe. She had fled New York for fear of her life. When she had felt that enough time had passed, she had come back to look for Alex. As scared as she had been, she still wanted Alex. He was an Ambrose, and he had Sam Woodsworth and Ken Stokes working for him. If she could only have him, her life would be filled with luxury and comfort. And no matter what had happened between them, he had still spared her life. In her mind, it meant that he must care for her. When she had come back to New York, Alex had already gone to Washington, D.C. to look for Debbie. She couldn't find him. Nobody at Preston University even seemed to know who he was. Melissa then went to meet with Sam, who had only told her that he was in Washington, D.C. She went there immediately, but she couldn't find him there either. She spent months looking for him, and she used up all her money. She was desperate. She needed money to keep looking, so she had flown to Baltimore to get a job as a singer. That was how she ended up on the same flight as Alex, and how she had bumped into Chris at the airport. Of course, Chris knew none of this. All he saw was a materialistic little rich girl who probably enjoyed making guys trip all over themselves to please her. "I can't believe it," he said mischievously. "How could you possibly be single? You must have dozens of guys chasing you. Like me, perhaps. I'm single too, but you'd expect that of me. Ha! I wouldn't stand a chance." He flashed his eyes knowingly at her. From the reaction on her face, he could tell that his words had the precise effect he had hoped for. "I guess I have high standards," she said. "I'm not interested in ordinary guys." She paused and stared pensively into the table. "I used to see someone," she continued. "He was from a very important family, the Ambroses. Have you heard of them? They have the richest men in New York and Chicago working for them." She leaned forward and continued in a gleeful whisper. And I've seen him shoot a man, like it was nothing. His family's a force of nature. What do you think about that? He chased me desperately, bought me cars and diamonds, but I still turned him down. Chris sat silent and listened as she spoke. Everything was falling into place. So Alex is an Ambrose, he thought. It is as I suspected. Chris had always suspected that Alex was from a very rich family. It would have explained many of the things he'd been able to do, but Chris still had his doubts. If Alex was an Ambrose, it seemed impossible that he would stoop to the level of working as a security guard at a university, even if his family had cut him off. There was just one more answer he needed to confirm his suspicions. "Sounds like quite a guy," he said. "What was his name?" "Alex," Melissa answered indifferently. There it is, Chris thought. His suspicions had been confirmed beyond any doubt. "Are you here in Baltimore to look for him?" Chris asked and smiled derisively. His polite veneer was cracking. "I have to warn you, you might be very disappointed." She stared at him incredulously. "Why? Do you know where he is?" she asked. "Can you take me to him?" At the thought of finding Alex, her flirtatious behavior toward Chris had all but evaporated. "If you really want to see him, I'll take you to him," Chris said. "After we've eaten." The food was served, and they ate quickly. Melissa was in a terrible hurry to see Alex, and Chris was thirsty for his planned revenge. When they had finished, he called a taxi and took her to Johns Hopkins. "What did you bring me here for?" Melissa asked when they stopped outside the university. "Does Alex go here now?" "You'll see," Chris answered. They got out of the taxi, and he led her toward the residential building. As they approached the door, Chris stopped her and dragged her off the road. They hid behind the corner of a building, and he pointed at the security guard who was standing outside the main entrance. "That's Alex," he told her. Melissa scoffed, but then she looked a little closer. The man standing guard outside the residential building was Alex. Her mind was spinning. "It's impossible," she thought. "Why would Alex be working here as a security guard? He's rich." At this time, 2 teachers came out of the building and started chatting with Alex. In the crisp, windless night, Melissa and Chris picked up their words quite easily. "You know, we're so lucky to have such a capable young man here to protect us," one of the teachers said and laughed. "I do hope the university treats you well enough." Alex laughed. "I can't complain. Sure, it's a modest job for modest pay, but I get somewhere to live. And it's peaceful. As far as I can tell, I'm almost pointless." They all laughed. Melissa was shocked at what she had heard. Why would Alex take such a humble job? She felt as if she was dreaming. Chris saw the puzzlement and disappointment on her face. He decided to make his move. "You know, you were right that Alex used to be someone, but his family cut him off. He's perfectly normal now, meaning he's poor and has no future. His family doesn't care what happens to him." "He's a loser," Melissa murmured bitterly. "You still want to talk to him?" Chris said with a smirk on his face. "He has a job at least. Probably a bike, too. Maybe you can live together in his cozy dorm room." "No!" Melissa exclaimed. From what she had just seen, Alex might as well be dead to her. I don't want to see him. It's pointless. Then let's go, Chris said. I think we've seen enough sadness and poverty for one evening. He took Melissa's hand and led her off campus. When they came out onto the main street, they saw that a black Mercedes-Benz was parked and waiting for them. When Melissa saw the fancy car, her eyes sparkled with delight. Melissa, please get in, Chris told her as the driver opened the door for them. I've had a good time tonight. Would you like to have a final drink at my place? Melissa nodded enthusiastically. She could hardly believe her luck. Just as one door had closed to her, another had opened. She got into the car. When she had gotten into the car, she took out her phone and Googled Chris's name. She immediately found out that he was a Stedman of Baltimore. He was the heir to one of the most influential families in the city. If she could land him, she would be set for life. Melissa pulled out all the stops. As he got into the car and sat down, she winked at him and stroked his thigh with her hand. Then she unbuttoned a button on her blouse, pretending she was warm. Chris smiled knowingly at her. On the inside, he was filled with contempt. To him, she was nothing but another snobby, entitled brat who would do anything for money. He resented her. But she fit perfectly into his newly hatched plan. Melissa, he said affectionately as he took her hand, I know we've only just met, but I think I'm starting to really like you. I had a good time at dinner. I was hoping that we could start seeing more of each other. Melissa was overjoyed. Her magic had worked even faster than she had thought, and Chris was already hooked. She agreed enthusiastically. Yes, of course, she exclaimed. I know I was a little distracted at dinner, but I really like you too. Of course I want to see you again. She leaned toward him and rested her head against his chest. Chris held her tightly, but in his heart, he felt nothing but disdain for her. It turned out she wasn't just a gold digger. She was stupid and naive as well. Driver, he called out. We're not going home. Take us to the hotel.
Thank you for listening to Crown TV. Please don't forget to subscribe, share and turn on the notification button.